welcome you all to Trek Wars.
This type of light cruiser starship was in service to Starfleet during the late 24th century and bore a resemblance to the Intrepid Class cruiser that were in service around the same time as the Deep Space Nine Dominion War. Physically, the saucer section and warp nacelles were taken from the Intrepid Class science vessel, while the secondary hull was delivered from an enlarged Condor Class raider. The Yeager Class was neither a fast nor as well armed as its baseline Intrepid. An Astro shuttle was docked at the underside of the saucer section. This variant ship was 402 meters in length, 195 meters in width, and 58.69 meters tall. This type of light cruiser's mass was 550,000 metric tons and was normally staffed with by 204 officers and crew, with a 1,500 Cochrane unit warp core feeding 2 warp nacelles and 2 impulse engine models. These vessels could maintain a max speed of warp 9.55 for 12 hours. Armament on this ship included 7 Type 8 phaser emitters and 1 photon torpedo launcher, with defenses of standard deflector shields. Alright, so let's take note of the weaponry. So it's 7 Type 8 phaser emitters. So phaser emitters will have an attack value of around 13,750. Now, I believe the ship is using probably a TNG style photon torpedo tube, so that would be upwards of 171,000 on your point scale of damage instead of Kirk era 65,000. Now, the thing about these 7 Type 8 phaser emitters, if you guys have seen other videos, you'll know that before I had a calculation of 30,000. That was way off and was completely re-engineered based off a fight that we see take place with a runabout. So the correct Type 8 phaser emitter is actually 13,750. So when it comes to offensive capabilities, this ship is very lacking. It says defense, it's standard. So a standard defense or a standard Federation shield during this time period would be 1,040,000. Now, just to give you a comparison to the difference than would say the primary Condor class hull, what we know from the Condor classes, which would be the Raiders only, is that they have a shield of 260,000. So that gives you an idea of the actual difference. Now let's talk about what we should see on side the Condor class, like what kind of weaponry it has. So a standard Condor class has 2 forward-facing torpedoes tubes, and it has 2 rear-facing torpedo tubes. And then on top of that, it also has 2 Type 8 phaser emitters. So pretty much all Condor classes will have that standard layout of weaponry. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Intrepid and then the Condor class, and let's kind of compare, and you can see there's such a huge difference in the power outputs. So a standard Intrepid class, all its weapons all together is like 1,495,000. Shields for 1,430,000. Its hull value is 520,000. The hull value is not particularly that brilliant or great, but I mean its mass is 700 metric tons, so it's a decent sized ship. Obviously the Raider, it's incredibly small. Its mass is only like 2,600,000. It's got a really powerful hull for a ship of its size at 195. It's kind of like a bird of prey. Its shields are 260,000. It's not impressive at all. That's like a Kirk era level. Its weapons are only 190,000. So that's real important. When we move on to the next bit of images, we can kind of get an understanding of why this ship only has 7 Type 8 phaser emitters and 1 photon torpedo tube. So when you look at the ship all together, at every weapon point that exists on the ship, you'll see that the ship has 6 Type 10 phaser emitters, 2 Type 8 phaser cannons, 6 torpedo tubes, and 1 quantum torpedo tube. But it obviously can't power all that with the warp core that it's using, because it's using obviously a Condor class warp core, and that's not going to be sufficient enough to power any of those weapons. So it's rerouting basically its weapon systems to the phaser arrays, which are Type 10, but the output that's being generated to them is only powerful enough to produce a Type 8 phaser emitter. So what they have done with this ship is either they are only transmitting that much power, or they have actually removed the Type 10 phaser emitters and replaced them with older Type 8 phaser emitters, which are things that you would have seen on some of the other ships out there, like, for an example, the Ambassador class. I'm sure newer Ambassador classes have been replaced with Type 10, and they just replaced those. So this is just a ship that's a bunch of different parts from different ships, obviously. Honestly, I don't think they really did that. It's a possibility. What I really think they did is that the amount of power being generated to these is limited to what they can produce, and they're only able to produce at a power level of Type 8 phaser emitters. So let's take a look at what that would look like. Alright, so when we take a look at this, where it says Ship 1, that's all the different armaments that is on the Yeager class, if it was running the power systems, right? That's how much power is required to do this. So what does it have? So it has 6 Type 10 phasers, it has 1 Mk-80 launcher, it has 2 Type 8 phasers, it has 4 photon torpedo tubes that are standard, and then it has 2 TNG torpedo tubes. So the TNG torpedo tubes are 171,000. The standard is going to be the 65,000, which is like the Kirk era. So what that means is, if you're to look at that, the power output, which say is based on the amount of damage it's doing, hypothetically. So you're looking at 1,344,500. Now let's look at the ratio that it actually is and what it's said to do based on the lure. It has only 7 Type 8 phasers, which is going to be 96,250. It has 1 photon torpedo tube, which I'm going to put as 65,000. So it comes up to 161,250. Now, does that fall in line with the power output that we know that the Raider can do, which was, I believe, 190? Alright, so the reason why I gave it an old torpedo launcher is this. If I was to add a standard TNG launcher, which is 171,000, it puts it over what that warp core is supposedly supposed to be able to do. So it's supposed to be able to accommodate only weapons up to 190,000. You'd get to 267,250 if we switched out the torpedo launcher. So the idea that I have is that the forward-facing Mk-80 launcher, which can do quantums and everything, it's too much power to go to that. They can't direct that much power to that. So they have removed that launcher and just added one of the 4 launchers and replaced it that are coming from, obviously, the Raider. And then that would mean that it would fall in those power requirements. So as far as cannon goes, this is what the ship is doing. Now, I don't exactly agree with it, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because I did do a visual calculation based on what a Jem'Hadar fighter can do, what this ship has said it can do, and based on these stats, this ship isn't even capable of taking one Jem'Hadar fighter on by itself, based on these stats. Alright, so now that we understand what the stats are, what they say, now we have to have an understanding of what the ship was actually doing, why it was there, the reasoning for it, why it was created, and it's a pretty unique story. So basically what was happening is the Federation was building lots of starships. It was building the Intrepid class. Now the Intrepid class is a very, very expensive, time-consuming ship. And when I say expensive, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about resources, technology, and time. The ship is small, it's state-of-the-art, and just about every system on it is unique. So that makes it incredibly hard to construct. But the ship performed so well, and Federation wanted this ship so bad that they had started building a large amount of them. Now, when they started building the ship, by the time that the Dominion War broke out, they realized that they did not have the time and resources to spend on these ships, that there's too much being put into it and not enough to get out of it. So they stopped the construction of these ships. And at that point, these ships had constructed the nacelles and the top saucer section only. And so they pulled these out of the shipyards and they started constructing new ships for the war. Now, that might seem strange to you, why they just finished building. Like I said, the ship takes so long to build that you could build 2 or 3 starships for the same amount of time it would take to build one Intrepid. So rather than just leave them there and doing nothing, they decided that they were going to attach these frames or these saucer sections of the Intrepid to different ships. So what I believe happened is these ships were actually pulled out of the shipyards, placed on the side, and that they had either brought in or towed other ships that they were going to use as hybrid parts. And so the one that we're looking at, the Yeager, the most famous of all of them, that one is using an enlarged Condor class hull. And they are literally just stacking it right on top of it. Now, it wouldn't take very long to integrate these two ships as far as putting them together. Now, the internal parts are going to be far more complicated because you're taking state-of-the-art and old. And because they're not really very compatible, that's why it underperforms when it comes to its warp capabilities. And that's also why the ship is not able to power up all those weapon systems, and it's limited. So obviously they redirected the power systems, so they had taken those systems and then redirected them to those emitters. So I think personally that all the weapon systems that are on board the Condor are been deactivated, and that energy and those resources, those tubings, those power cores have been redirected to the phaser emitters that are aboard the saucer section. And so that's why it performs the way it does. It's very, very weak for a ship of this era. It's fighting with weapons that would have been seen during the Kirk era on, a Excelsior class starship. And this ship doesn't even have the stats of an Excelsior class. So this ship is greatly underarmed compared to other ships, which is a really strange thing. Now, there are other variants of this that exist, and I'm going to go ahead and take a moment and I'll tell you about them. Okay, so there are different Intrepid Constitution class that was out there they did the exact same hybridization, but it's even worse. Well, actually it's probably not as worse. It's probably about the same, but instead of using Condor, they're using literally the secondary hull of it looks like the original Constitution. And then it's got the warp nacelles of, it looks like a Reliant. It's a really strange ship. Now, the mass of this ship is 1,300,000 metric tons, so it weighs way, way more. So its power core is probably better than what we're seeing on the other variant. And this one is calling it a medium cruiser instead of a light cruiser. So this ship, there's no specifications on it. We don't know what kind of weapon, so everything is just speculation. So I'm not really even going to bother, but I mean, a ship like that, they usually had Type 7 or Type 8 from that era, but maybe this ship is using something better. I don't think its stats would be a whole lot better than what we were just looking at. So this is a very strange idea the Federation had for getting a ship out there. And then with that being said, now let's kind of talk about what could have been done to the ship. Okay. So we know there's limitations on what the ship's going to be able to do and how it's going to be able to perform. Now, if I was the Federation, or what I think they should have done and what the lure should be, now I'm fine with it. This is just what they had to do. It's complete under desperation, but for such an expensive part of a ship, just to be wasting it, like I said, it's not even able to perform against a single Jem'Hadar fighter based on these stats. Now, I know there's an issue with the integration, and I understand that the warp speed, there's really nothing you can do about that, but what they should have done is they should have put some additional generators onto the ship that are there for only the weapons. So apparently the ship is able to power up standard shields. That's fine, but I really think they should have added those additional power supplies, I guess, in order to make the ship like perform better. Because if you were to do that, this ship will go from being like honestly kind of useless to all of a sudden performing as an actual real starship. So when we go and you look at the specifications, like what do we see on this ship? Like what do we have on here? We have those Type 10 phasers. So you would be able to have an offensive capability with just a Type 10 phasers of 390,000. And then if you're able to power that, MK-80 launcher, you could launch a quantum torpedo at an enemy target. Then, as the secondary backup weapons, yes, you have the 2 Type 8 phasers, which are, there. And then you have, you would have 2 standard rear torpedo launchers that are from Kirk era, which are not particularly great. And then you would have 2 standard TNG photon torpedoes in the back. So you would have 4 photon torpedo tubes that could fire at Dominion like ships that are trailing you. I mean, honestly, this ship would be pretty damn well armed at that point. I mean, 1,344,500. To give you an idea on the scale, like that's in the same like range as a standard Intrepid. Now, maybe they just can't do that. Maybe the weapons have to be integrated into a warp core. They don't have power sources that are capable of doing this, and everything I'm saying is just completely ridiculous. That is a possibility. I know most, if not all ships, their weapon systems are powered through the warp core. Now, I know that pulse phasers and some other weapons use some different technology in these crystals and things of this nature. So maybe they could pull something like that. But I really think that I would like for this ship, honestly, to have these stats that I said. I think it would make a lot more sense. Because then you're not just throwing the ship away and it's not garbage. Because what would happen in this scenario is if you're using what it says it has or what it's doing, a Dominion bug ship has a shield of like 325,000, somewhere around there. And then this ship does have that 1,040,000, which, on paper you think, oh, okay, it's going to be able to outlast it. But the Dominion weapons are hitting for 65,000 per shot. And it can fire something like 15 times in a row. That's like 900 and something points of damage. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's in the 900 scale, which I'll go ahead and look them up right now because I don't want to redo this part. So the Dominion beam weapons, Polaron beam weapons hit for 65, and it can hit for 15, and it's actually 975,000. So that first barrage, they come in, they're using torpedoes. Now, the Jem'Hadar torpedoes on the little bug ship, it could be, a standard low-wheeled 65,000. Or it could be hitting like 171. Like, we don't really know what the torpedo power is, but let's just say that it's on the weaker scale. They hit, it's going to do very little damage to the shields of the Dominion bug ship. And it's going to do next to nothing to obviously this Intrepid variant. But once you get into firing range, now you got that 65,000 point scale damage. If you can fire 15 times, that's 975,000. Now, when you get to the Federation, once you get into that close range, then what's happening to the Federation ship is using Type 8 phasers. So, I mean, Type 8 phasers aren't really going to do much of anything. Those things are doing like 13,750. Like, that's not really going to do a whole lot of anything. That's pretty low level tech. It can fire 12 times is what we've seen, so it's going to be able to deliver 165,000 points of damage. So that first barrage, you're doing 165,000 points of damage. They're doing 975,000. It's like almost like they're doing like like you're being attacked. What would that be? I'd say it's like what, 4 times better. So it's almost like you're being attacked by 4 of these Intrepid variants at the same time. So you're getting heavily outgunned. The shields are going to collapse after that first barrage. They'll be next to gun after that. And then once the second barrage starts, the Dominion bug ship is still going to have shields. It's still got that heavy armor plating. It's going to survive. And then the Intrepid variant is just absolutely going to be obliterated. As soon as those shields go down, it's just going to be a massacre. And then you just lost 204 crew members of this invariant ship, and then that's bad enough. You just lost the top half of one of the most state-of-the-art spaceships that they have. So this is a terrible idea, in my opinion. I don't see any good actually coming from this, and even though you need an extra body, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So now with that being said, now think about the scenario we see this ship. It's there defending Deep Space Nine. It's not very fast, and we know that. But if they had an additional core on there, right, where it could actually, have weapon systems that are worth a crap, and it could defend itself and power up those weapons that are on the Intrepid saucer section, then it would make sense why this thing is being stationed at space stations, because it's very slow, but it would still have a lot of firepower, and then it could be doing something. Like, if we change the scenario around and we give it the weapons that it has mounted, and then they're able to be powered, then this ship goes from not being able to take on a single Dominion bug ship to this ship could probably wipe out 3 of them. Like, because one quantum torpedo would be enough to wipe out a bug ship. Then once you come into range, the Type 10 phasers are going to be enough that you could destroy the second bug ship. And then, you could be maneuvering and fighting. You're still going to take heavy amounts of damage. But that second barrage, you could probably damage that ship with the torpedoes and then your different phaser banks. So this is just kind of my thoughts about the Yeager class and what it should be doing versus what it's doing. Now, we know the real reason the ship was created is just simply the fact it was pure desperation, and it's better than nothing, I guess. But in my opinion, this is kind of a terrible idea. Alright, so the last thing to note, when I was talking about this ship being slow, I'm talking about its warp speed is supposed to be affected by the way it's constructed. It's supposed to be actually maneuverable at sublight speed, so it could probably either be as maneuverable as a Jem'Hadar fighter or more maneuverable. It doesn't weigh a whole lot. I kind of think that the ship is probably similar as far as maneuverability, because Jem'Hadar ships are pretty maneuverable. So even if the ship is maneuverable and you throw that into a factor, it still doesn't really have the firepower based on its original stats to do much of anything. I still think in a one-on-one scenario, even if it is trying to outmaneuver the Jem'Hadar fighter, that because the Jem'Hadar fighter's weapons are 5 times the strength that it has, it's not going to be able to do much of anything. Now, other people have said, well, in the future, yeah, they're Type 8 phaser emitters, but they're able to generate more power than Type 8 phasers you've seen back in the day from the movies and stuff. And I've heard this kind of discussion before, but I have not seen or read anything that actually shows that what you're saying is actually true. And based on the information and from the manuals and stuff, that's not how the ships work, and that's not how weapon systems work, because the way the weapon systems are is you have a phaser bank, which says a Type 8. You have basically, we're going to say, cords that are running from that phaser bank to the reactor, and they're capable of only generating, whatever phaser output that they're doing. And if you were to go beyond that, you would burn it out or blow it up or destroy it. So you would never want to do that. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule, because Klingons, General Martok had done that with his Klingon bird of prey. So it would normally be shooting like 32,500, and then he turned off their safety systems, and then we're seeing outputs of 80,000. Now, it probably destroys the weapon and causes severe damage to it, and then it's replaced, but they don't really care. It's just 2 Klingon disruptors. Now, Federation ships are built differently than Klingon ships, and I don't think that that's really something they really want to be doing. And the way the ships are integrated, I think that would be more cons than pros to overwhelm the phaser emitters, because that just seems like very dangerous to do. And then even at that is, I don't think that the ship has the power to even overwhelm the phase emitters that it has based on what it says. Now, unless you reconstructed the ship like I said, and you would have to basically pull out all the tubing and all the wires and everything that's directly connecting to those phaser arrays and completely redo them in order to do what I was saying about making those systems operational. So this is my thoughts on the Yeager class. I thought the lure behind the ship was really cool. As far as performance-wise, though, I'm not impressed with it at all. I think it's a very underperforming starship. The lure is cool. It looks cool, but it's not a very good ship when you look at it from its stats. Now, this is my opinion. You guys have a different opinion. Make a comment. Let me know what you think. And I'm sure you guys have seen the video where I discussed and made fun of, if you were a captain and you're given this, would you be happy? The answer is no. You're probably going to die.